Tigers, right? I mean, I've been waiting 5 years to say that. I mean, y'all got to give me a break. As I reflect on the literature of the big book, I think about in the foreword to the third edition, the last sentence says, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic shares their experience, strength, and hope with another one. And that's what's happening in this room this morning because of God's grace and His ability to restore, okay? His ability to restore us. If you look at your neighbor right now, you will look at a living miracle. I think I oftentimes, after I've been here a while, begin to forget about the day that I was broken. When God come in my mess and He grabbed me by the hand and led me out. And oftentimes I like to be reminded that it doesn't matter if I got a day, a week, a month, or a year. Today, because of God's grace, I didn't drink liquor. And I want to be reminded of that. That it's because of God. And God alone do I stand here today and I'm able to share with you what He's done in my life. But there's many of people here today in this crowd that are the future of Alcoholics Anonymous that will go on to share this common peril and continue on sharing with others, reaching your hand out, grabbing them from the gates of hell. And so I think my only hope today is that you leave here thinking and knowing you have purpose in your life. And that the purpose of God rescuing you from the grips of drug addiction and alcoholism was so that you could go on and do it for another. When I think about recovery, when I think about it beginning, I think about change. I think about the day that God met me and what I looked like. Anybody recall the day that God met you and you couldn't even fathom why He would want anything to do with you? Am I the only one the day that God grabbed me despite me wondered what He had no business being where I was, did He? God, I don't know why you would come here to get me, right? But that often is what makes it so amazing. That the character of God doesn't change despite what we do. And that He's constant and He's consistent and He's forever pursuing us despite us. And that He's a good Father who wants to give good gifts. And one of those gifts that I've seen is sobriety. Amen. It's a good gift from God who He wants His children to experience. But something that I didn't realize was the day He met me in my mess and brought me into Alcoholics Anonymous, that didn't completely change me. I brought my bad habits, my wounds, and all the years of destruction with me. And so as I began to sit in AA meetings, meeting makers make it. Bradley, you need to go to this many meetings and you need to hang around people that are doing what you're doing. And all those things were very good advice. I made several meetings a day, every day for 5 months. And it was very good advice. But what I'd found myself doing is I found myself falling through the cracks in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I was just solely making meetings. And the more I would go would be what I had to do to get peace. And I found myself going to meetings to get peace. And one day I remember, and I'm not going through what it was like as much. I want y'all to understand today that everybody here knows how to drink liquor. If you don't, you're probably here just supporting a child, your children. But everybody here knows how to drink liquor, man. It's just not everybody knew how to stop doing that altogether. I was a professional at stopping drinking liquor, but I had no clue how to stay stopped. I didn't know. And so I remember my first AA meeting, I was sitting in a metal chair, and you could probably go back to the Shady Group this day on Church Street in Florence, and you could go and lift those chairs up and you'll find the chair I sat in. Because I was gripping that metal chair so hard because I was so scared my fingerprints are still in it. I remember being scared to death in AA. Not knowing what the future held, but knowing I didn't want to die. That's about all the motivation I had to go into the rooms of AA was that I didn't want to die. That gift they often say of desperation? I had it. And I didn't want to die. And I remember them offering chips, And they offered the white chip the first time, and I don't need one, right? And you go through and you see people picking up 30 and 60 and 90 days, and you think to myself, I can't not drink one day, more or less 30 days. And the hope that it begins to create in us when we begin to see people doing something we've never been able to do begin to encourage me that maybe I could. And so as they offered the white chip the second time for anybody had been in a blackout that meeting, because I promise you I could not tell you anything anyone shared in that meeting because I was too concerned with what you were saying and how you were lying, because I've tried everything you're saying and it ain't working for me. That's why I'm in Florence in an AA meeting. Though you sound good, there couldn't be any truth to it. So everybody who was sharing in the meetings, I was judging from the beginning, and I didn't even know their name. He's too old. He couldn't help me. I don't know why he's here. He's too young, you know. And everybody who shared, I didn't identify. I was trying to compare everything they did, and I was failing miserably. You know, comparison's the devil. You compare your chapter 1 to somebody's chapter 10, and you try to be at chapter 10 without embracing where you're at. So how could you ever get where you're going if you ain't accepted where you're at? And so that day when I went up to pick up a white chip, the guy jerked my hat off my head and threw it on the floor. And it pissed me off. You know, it's easy to go from being so humble to mad. I was so humble and encouraged by all the sobriety to when he did something I didn't like, all of a sudden something came up in me of murder. And I wanted to choke him. Instantly wanted to choke him. Now, I don't know about y'all, but over the years in AA, I realized that my thinker was broken, that my reaction was always bent towards what suited me. In every occasion, everything I did was decided on how it could help me. And so as I was so angry and wanting to fight this man for some reason, I grabbed my hat off the ground and I went back and sat down, and that's when I started clenching that chair. And I say that I was scared, but I was actually angry. But the truth was I wasn't an angry, big, bad kid like I had made everybody to think. I was actually scared, and I was masking it with anger. Really, I wanted that guy who took my hat off to really accept me and like me, but yet when he didn't do or approve of me, it scared me because I'd been rejected many of times before I ever walked into AA, and my thought was as if he's already rejected me, there's no spot for me in this place. I know many today in here can relate. Many of you today, your recovery is going to begin. Your healing is going to begin. And you're going to leave this place today. And today is going to be the first day of the rest of your life. And you're going to look back on how miserable you were this day. And you're going to be sitting with a newcomer one day. And you're going to reminisce on that very day being the best day of your life. And you're going to be able to share how that day was the first day of the rest of your life. And how that makes it out to understand that feelings are very minimum in our walk with God. Because the days that seem to be the worst as we look back were the first day of where God was taking me. And so as I was waiting for them to say the Lord's Prayer, you know how we waiting to say the Lord's Prayer so that we can make a beeline out the door? I done mapped out a path on how to get out that door, you know. Because as soon as they said amen, I was gone. I didn't want you to talk to me. You know how we get when we get angry? We close off. We leave. We shut ourselves off. We isolate, hoping that time heals it. Hoping that time heals it and never addressing it. And God showed up that day in the form of a man. I call him an angel. And I was making a beeline to that door. He grabbed me. And he said something that was the most profound statement I had ever heard in my life. He said, son, I've been watching you through this meeting. And you have to be the most angriest kid I've seen in a long time. So I felt like God needed you to hear that nothing this meeting offers you is going to fix what you're experiencing inside your soul. He grabbed an AA book and he handed it to me. He said, you might want to read this. And that made me even angrier. How in the world can reading a book fix what's going on in me? And so I went back to my recovery house that I was in. And, I say, it's the first time I spoke in AA since my dad died. And, man, he was my biggest fan. Boy, if there was anybody consistent in my life, it was my father. And a lot of people say he was enabling me, but as I look back, I see the love of God all in everything he did for me. He was the most persistent, constant, consistent person in my life who loved me despite me. And the closest thing I knew to this God who I felt had nothing to do with me was through him, my dad. And man, I know today that he was proud of me when he died. And I don't say that arrogantly. I say that because I seen God prove him right. I seen it. I seen God give him the gift he always wanted, which was me being his son. Out of all the controlling and telling me what to do, when I got sober, I finally realized my dad just wanted a son. And God gave my dad that through this tool, AA. AA is such a great tool. Celebrate Recovery, Cocaine Anonymous. These are wonderful tools that God uses to restore us back to health. We often don't talk about religion in here, but I often think about the story of the 3 wise men being brought to Jesus. They were brought there by a star. And I often think of AA of being that star that leads people to God, that changes their life forever. I often realize that God isn't concerned with what draws you to Him as far as it is that we experience Him. And AA was that star for me. It was the tool in God's hand that drawed me near to Him. And as I went back to that recovery house, as most of you probably know, I began to read the first forwards and the preface and the doctor's opinion, and I began to throw my book across the room. Because it made no sense. I was reading these words. Bill Wilson was a very brilliant man. Very educated man. Oftentimes I was thankful that there was areas in the big book he wasn't really like prayer and meditation. I was thankful he didn't know a lot about it, because then he just simplified it. If you read through steps 10, 11, and 12, it's the most simplistic instructions in the big book. And it wasn't because he knew a lot about it. He just knew that there was a way to teach people on their level. And that's what I'm thankful for. And because I began to throw this book, and these words made no sense to me. And there was often times I wondered what I was doing. But when someone took their time with me to read that book with me and explain it to me, the game changed. The game changed. The gentleman said, I just want you to read this book so that you can decide for yourself whether or not this is what you want to do. Now think about that. Oftentimes we hand people books and we start to tell them what they're going to do. But I promise you, in my experience, telling me what to do only makes me want to not do it. And so I'm thankful that there is somewhat of a structure in AA called the 12 Traditions that sort of help us to operate in a way that's most useful. Now, this isn't some rule book to control us. This is a structure on how the power of God can use us to best help people. When you begin to see that the common welfare is what's concerning a personal recovery, or you start to see principles before personalities, you begin to see this gets self out of the way that allows God to speak through us as a whole. See, this is for a whole, this is for us. So if we're going to be useful to the newcomer, because we often say that's the most important person in the room, not only do we need personal recovery, we need group recovery. Because as a group, we are all selfish, self-centered people. The book says we thought that the root of our troubles was selfishness and self-centeredness. And so this gets our opinion out of the way and allows God a vessel to speak and do and have His way with AA, because this is what He created. This is not something we did. So let me reverse back. Let me just tell you about the day before I ended up in that meeting, to give all this stuff relevancy, and then we'll move on. I was in a place called Wellspring. It was in Williamston, South Carolina. Anybody ever heard of Williamston, South Carolina? Well, I became very fond of Williamston, South Carolina. About every 9 months, I would make my regular visit to Detox. Anybody else in here? I'm hoping I'm not talking to people that don't identify. I might have not came to the right place. But I would make my yearly visit to Detox in hopes to get filled, to get relieved of the physical aspect of drug addiction and alcoholism. And then, boy, did I have it. I had it, man. I remember leaving that place, and I remember having it all together. Now, my first few visits there was not friendly, and I was very nasty to the people. Throwing chairs, flipping them all off, telling them what they were going to do for me because I already had what I needed to do mapped out, sort of thing, And so this last visit I remember very vividly because I was still just as angry as I was the times I went before, but the only thing I can recall that was different was the fact that what they told me to do, I just didn't ever say nothing, I just did it. When the other times they would tell me what to do, I would question why. How is that going to help me? No, I'm not going to do it. See, I still felt that same way, but this last time I went in, every time they would ask me to do something, for some reason, I'd just say, okay. I just said, okay. And I remember days going by, and I couldn't sleep because I was coming off of alcohol and other substances. And man, I just wanted to sleep. And so I remember the last night before they were going to release me, I was sitting in my bed, soaking wet. Y'all know that? Like I jumped in the lake. I felt like. Couldn't sleep. And I said, you know what? I'm going up there, and that man's going to give me something to sleep. Paying all this money, he's going to help me, right? And the reason why I knew they had something was because several times before I got belligerent and they tied me down and shot me with something, and I don't remember nothing after that. So he wasn't about to lie to me. I knew they had something. So I walked up there and I looked at that guy and I slapped my hand down on the podium and I looked at him in the face and I said, I'm scared of the dark. I said, I'm scared of the dark. And it startled the guy because he didn't have a clue what to say. And as he began to, ruffle through his words, he said, son, why don't you just take a chair from the hallway and prop your door up, and maybe if the light comes in, you can sleep. And so I remember putting my head down, saying okay, walking back thinking how stupid he was. And as I did what I didn't want to do and understand or like, I slept like a baby that night. I slept like a baby that night. And as I look back on that day, that was the first day I ever told a grown man that I was scared of anything. And that was the first time in my life that I ever took direction for another person and didn't ask why. And I got immediate results. I woke up that day with something going on in me. They had been on me all week about going to this facility in Florence. If you leave here, you're going to die, son. That's what they were telling me. You've got to further your recovery. You've been here enough. There's something you're missing. Go to Florence. Go to Florence. And I said, finally, I woke up that day. I brushed my teeth. Y'all believe that? Shaved my face. Took a bath. I was just like in awe of myself, Like normal people wouldn't be laughing right now. They'd be thinking, where am I at? Like dude's excited about brushing his teeth, about taking a bath. But we all identify because, hey, listen, it was never the chemical, was it? It was always that god-awful feeling in our own skin without it, wasn't it? And without it, we could never muster up the willingness to do anything, could we? And to wake up that next morning, separated from chemicals and wanting to do something, I knew something was working in me that I had no clue of. And so I picked up the phone arrogantly and said, I'll call this place. And I called and I said, y'all got a bed for me? And the guy said, yeah, we got one bed open. We got one bed. And it's yours. And it's yours. Come get it. You wouldn't believe who came to that detox and drove me 300 miles to Florence, would you? My dad. You know, my biggest fan. The one who spoke into my potential, and he didn't speak into my struggle. He never wanted to witness that his son was this, because he knew God had created me for greater. So he would never speak to my struggle. He would always speak to my potential. And he would come and get me because he knew something that I didn't know. And he knew if the grace of God ever got a hold of me, that my life would never be the same again. So he continued to be a willing participant in the plan that God had on my life. And he picked me up and had a blue bandana wrapped around my head. I was the most gangsterest white boy you ever met. I ain't never shot a gun in my life. Well, I hope that breaks down the phoniness of the one sitting here today that puts off the image that they're bad and they're not. Because I thought I was bad and I wasn't. And I had earrings in my ear and a flat bill on my head. And yes, I'd sold drugs my whole life. But you better believe that made me a coward. Because boys run the street and men own up to their responsibility and take care of it. And when I started seeing who I was for being a coward, and I started realizing the things I was doing was not making me a man. I thought all the girls that I could hang out with and the things I did made me a man, but it wasn't. None of those things made me a man. When I started to own up to my own failure and take responsibility, that's what made me a man. That's what made me a man. And that was a long trip to Florence. I made my dad do a few things that he didn't want to do, but at this point he did it because he knew that it would get me where I was going. He stopped and bought me a cell phone that I didn't need to have, but I wouldn't go in unless he did. Y'all ever been there? If you don't do this, I ain't going to do that. My dad cooperated. Many would say that's enabling, but he knew where I was going, that it would be a long way home to walk if I left. So he did everything he could to get me to Florence, and we pulled up at this place, and I remember getting out, and the gentleman who owned it had said something off the wall on the phone to my dad, and I told my dad, screw him. We're going to help him. What's he doing yelling at you? Take me home. My dad said, oh no. You going. And we pulled up to this little house, little rundown. It wasn't a rundown house. It was in a rundown part of the neighborhood, and I went in, and he left. You know, before he died, we often laugh about that day. You know, but he told me something. He said, Bradley, he said, when I left you there, he said it was like a ton of bricks fell off my back. He said, for one day, for one night, I knew you were safe. He said, and also if you left, I knew you'd have a long way to walk home. But we often don't consider ourselves as thieves because we haven't took nothing tangible. But I'm going to tell you today that if you robbed your parents of sleep and peace, you were a thief. And I had to own up to the many a nights my mom and dad didn't sleep because of my behavior. And as me now being a father of a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 3-year-old, I know the eggshells they walked around on. I know the fear that they lived in with what I was doing. But I often say I'm a product of prayer because no matter what I did, my parents never stopped praying. You know, a lot of times in recovery, I'll get myself to doing something to fix something, and the last thing that I say after nothing I did mattered, I guess I'll pray about it. But the more I mature and the more I grow up in God, I begin to understand that prayer is the work. That oftentimes I wouldn't burn up so much energy foolishly if I would pray first. That God would work some things out while I'm out of the way of it. And so I walked into this place, man. Now, I was scared. You know, blue bandana around the head, hat backwards, pants sagging, earphones in, listening to Young Jeezy. I was as hard as I could be on the outside. But boy, was I empty on the inside. And I was scared to death to go in that place. And I walked into the office, and I met the director. And the first thing he said to me when he looked at me was, son, what are you doing here? I was thinking to myself, I didn't say this, I don't think, but I was thinking to myself, Bo, I just drove 300 miles for you to tell me what I'm doing here. And he looks at me and asks me what I'm doing there. And boy, he had hair down to his waist here. He had tattoos from his neck to the bottom of his feet, smoking a cigarette. And here I am judging him and not looking in the mirror at what I look like. And I thought to myself, how in the world can he help me? And so he went on to say something to me that I'm not going to mention today, that I don't want to offend anybody. I've come to learn through the years that there are things that are funny to people, but there are some things that I think is funny that's offending. And I don't want to offend nobody. You know, today I just live to satisfy God. I just want to be a vessel for His peace, His love, His mercy, His kindness, His goodness. And I want to represent that in all I can. So if there's things that I feel would offend you, then I'm going to keep it to myself. And he said something highly offensive to me that day. It was off the wall, had nothing to do with recovery. It was just nothing to do with it, okay? Believe me when I say it didn't have nothing to do with it. And boy, did it hurt my feelings. But after he said it, I sat down. And for some odd reason, it made me wanted to hear what he said. And as I look back, I began to understand the thousands of dollars I had spent at Wellspring, I'd spent on treatment, I'd spent on asking these doctors who had medical degrees on the wall how they could help me of alcoholism. This man who did not have a doctorate degree, a bachelor's degree, an associate's degree, had never been to college, barely made it through high school, a slum drug addict on the streets of Myrtle Beach, knew something that none of them knew. And he knew the one thing was that no human power could relieve my alcoholism. And so if some off-the-wall comment would run me out of there, he knew he could not get anywhere with me. But he knew if he said something and I sat down, he had my undivided attention. And I'm going to tell you guys, within 10 or 15 minutes, a man I didn't know made me feel like I knew him a lifetime. A man I didn't know had won a confidence of a scared, rejected young boy who grew up always being rejected. One man who didn't know me but knew something that I didn't know won my confidence within 10 minutes. He looked at me, he said, "Son, let's really talk about what you're doing here." I said, "Okay." He said, "So let me get this right. Are you here because you drink too much and you use too much drugs?" And as he begins to talk, I'm thinking, this dude's been reading my diary, you know. And I'm dimed in. Do you realize the book on page 18, if I'm not mistaken, it may be 18, maybe 17. Don't hold me to it. Look it up. It'll change your life. You know, what I quote up here today isn't saving your life. It's the action you put towards seeking God that will. Don't go off what other people say. Go look for it yourself. Make sure it's the truth, because it's only the truth that'll set you free. It ain't what other people tell you. It says it's about the seeking you do that changes your life. And so I'm dimed in, Bo. This guy's got me down to a T. I'm here because I'm drinking too much. I'm using too much drugs. And he looked at me and said, "How long have you known that?" Now, I was 21. I just turned 22. This was August the 22nd of 2005. That's going on almost 10 years ago. This date happened. And he was like, "How long have you known that?" And I said, "Well, I was 22." So I said, I've known it at least 7 years. You know, I've known it through every time I ingested chemicals, I always wanted more. He said, "So for 7 years at least, you've known that drinking and using is a bad idea." I said, "Of course." He said, "And it causes misery. It causes everything to go wrong in your family. Nothing good ever comes out of it. There's only a glimpse of hope, only to pull a structure down on your head and ruin everything that you've ever worked for." I said, "Absolutely." He looked at me and the $1,000,000 question was, "Then why you keep doing it?" If you've known for 7 years, son, that drinking is a bad idea, then why you keep doing it? And for someone who had everything to say all the time that never run out of words, I was speechless. All I could muster up was, I don't know. He said, that's probably the first time you've ever been honest with yourself. He said, because son, when I got here, sitting where you're sitting in front of a man who helped me, he asked me the same thing and my same answer was, I don't know. He said, but through recovery, the power of God has revealed to me some things that I would like to share with you. And he began to share information with me that no amount of drinking and using ever showed me. Because everybody in here today knows about the allergy of the body. Everybody in here knows what happens when they ingest chemicals. They can't stop. Or they can't stop when they want to. There's some days you can muster up the power to stop, but it's the days that you want to stop the most that you can't. It's not always once I start, I can't stop. It's once I start, I can't tell you when I'm going to stop. That throws out the ones in here that are just doing it every other weekend, but yet the symptoms are all the same. Just because you ain't drinking as much doesn't mean you're not alcoholic, because what we learn here is the drinking is but a symptom. We had to get down to cause and condition. It's not what you drink, it's why you drink. And so he began to talk to me about this thing called a mental obsession. And he began to describe to me the problem of drug addiction and alcoholism as they seen it. And he began to tell me about a house. He said, Bradley, if I was to lock you up in a house, and I was to put you in it, and I was to board up the windows and chain every door and give you everything you need to do the drug of your no choice, whether it's alcohol, and I'm hopefully not offending anyone in here today by talking about drinking or using. Matter of fact, if we read the text, which is what the program got its name from, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, which is that blue book, Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, seen fit to talk about using sedatives when drinking wasn't enough. So if the founder of AA knew that the problem was a symptom, that when drinking wasn't enough, he moved to morphine, I think it's imperative that we begin to share it in AA and don't add to or take away what we think we like and don't like. So he talked about it. He talked about it. So when alcohol quit working for me, I started snorting Oxycontin. I started snorting morphine, trading everything I had for it. Everything. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But he says, if I put all the Oxycontin you need, if a spoon, a needle, whatever you need, fill it up with alcohol, whatever your drug of choice is, put it in this room, nail the doors, lock it, what would happen to you? I said I would die. You know why I knew I would die? Because my experience showed that I drank until I died. I used till I died. He said, so if someone come along and busted the door down, you've seen this breath of fresh air, because I hate it for you guys, but you can't physically do but so many drugs. To the day you say this is enough. You can't physically do it, or something outside of you stops you, the cops, no money, whatever it may be, and you get to a point where you're done. It's like a door being busted in that place, and you seeing light at the end of the tunnel to crawl out, to only say, I'm never going to do this again. To go home, right? To go to AA, to go to these treatment facilities, to start getting told they love you, to start doing for you what you can't do for yourself at times. Start feeding you, start providing you with transportation to get work, start doing all these things only for you not to do much of anything, to get to a place of sitting watching TV one day wondering why you can't kick the thought of drinking again. Though yesterday, a week ago, or a month ago, it was killing you. He said, Bradley, is that you? I said, yes, sir. That's me. Every time I'd say I'd never do it again, I did it. He said, well, maybe you have an unwhole mind. And maybe unwhole doesn't mean continuing to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Maybe your definition of insanity is wrong. He said, because don't Tiger Woods play golf? And don't he do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? I said, yes. He said, that's called practice. And is he abstained from practicing? I said, no. He said, what we become to understand unwhole means is insanity. That insanity means unwhole. That there's a part of your brain like a pizza that's missing. And that part is God. And because of self-will, you block Him off from doing for you what you can't do for yourself, which is saying no to alcohol. And it blew my mind. That I actually was doing it against my will? That you mean the times that I walked by my children when they had nothing? When I took the very $20 I had in my pocket and smoked crack with it beside them, that didn't mean that I was a bad dad, that meant I was sick? That changed my life. That for so long people said if you could do it, you could just do it. If you was a man, you'd stop. If you loved them children, you'd stop. And man, I'd walk out crying, going to get drugs, knowing my kids needed me, feeling condemned and awful, like I was a poor, pitiful piece of crap. To sitting in front of a drug addict who had been saved by God's grace to affirm me, Bradley, you're not bad getting good, you're good. You're sick trying to get well. Whew. Changed my life. That was the day I walked into the AA meeting that day. Angry as I could ever be. For someone who was aware that meeting makers didn't make it. Somebody who was aware that his recovery wasn't contingent on himself and what he could get, but the constant thought of others and how he could best meet their needs. Someone who was armed with the truth about themselves and this solution, who was willing to get out of their comfort zone and reach their hand out, grab me, told me he loved me, and gave me a solution that would save my life. As I went back home to not understand it, not like it, not want to do it, but made and mustered up every bit of willingness I had to do it. And it was never a day go by that God didn't put the right people in my life to give me exactly what I needed when I needed it. And I know a lot of you today say, Bradley, that just seems so simple. Well, let me tell you something about simple. Grace is simple. Being saved by grace through faith. That's not AA. That comes from the Bible. AA just took it from them. But all this process does is teach us how to be saved through faith. By His grace. That's what it's teaching us. Coming to believe. Not that. Right here. Faith without works is dead. It talks all through the book about it. But what I began to understand was God was dispensing me a thing called grace I didn't deserve. It was unmerited. It was nothing I ever did because I knew I didn't, because He met me at my worst. Now I want y'all to dime in, because I hope you ain't heard nothing I said up until this point, so that you can understand what I'm saying now. Because what I'm about to share this last 12 minutes almost killed me in sobriety. At 6.5 years, 7 years, wanting to drink. Doing everything that I was always doing before I got sober. The only thing that had not changed in my life was that I was not drinking. So please listen to me. And I don't share this from no spiritual moral hilltop. I don't share this like you're doing something wrong. I share this because God has called me to love my brothers. And if I rob you of the truth, I lie. It's just as easy as grace through faith. Yet my recovery started getting bad when I started trusting in myself and not faith. Therefore, I walked away from grace and there was nothing I needed. So I had to start going to meetings to find the peace that God gave freely. You see, grace is unmerited, and it dispenses every one of you everything that you already need. Everything you need, the amount of faith that you need is already a part of you, and that's what God knew. He brought you to a place to look and step forward to get rid of the things that was blocking you of walking in grace. And as we become aware and step forward, the things that are blocking us, which is we trusting self, what we do when the thinking would crop up, we would deny that, which is self, and we would walk with what God would have us do, regardless of how it felt. And as long as we denied self that we seen in our 4th step, we confessed in our 5th step that it was objectionable to have a healthy relationship with God, we seemed to have everything we needed. Most of the time we walked around the happiest people there were. And every day was good. But most of our troubles come when we meet that girl in AA and our eyes connect and I know God's the one. She's the one. Well, listen. Relationships by their very nature is good. That's why you can justify getting in them. They're good. Matter of fact, sex was a gift from God. It's good. That's why you justify it, because it's good. By its very nature, it's good. Yet you want it without God's ordinances. So that's why it becomes destructive. And it's not that you wanting to get into a relationship is bad. It's that you wanting to get into it before you ask God, has He prepared you for it? That's right. Because now you're beginning to learn, if somebody loved you enough to talk to you about these steps and what the literature says, now you're learning that you didn't have a drinking problem, that you had a living problem with a drinking and drug solution. So now the drinking wasn't the problem, so now that it's removed, you can actually start looking at where the issues arise. And when you do a 4-step, you start looking at your unhealthy dependence on people. And how now all of a sudden that you've been sober 1 month, you want to put yourself in a relationship with another person because that's where you find comfort. And what happens is you do what you told yourself you can't do. Do you understand that this is a personal inventory? I don't assist you with this. That's why the 3 essentials is open-mindedness, honesty, and willingness. That's why the desire to seek God must come from within. You sat down and wrote a 4-step and you got honest. You confessed to your sponsor in the 5th step, and what you were telling your sponsor is this is what I'm admitting is objectionable in my walk with God. And if I ever do it, please remind me. That's what we're saying. But yet when they come to remind you what you're doing that you said you couldn't, you get mad at them. Then you go gossip about them, and then there's an entity and a division in AA when this was meant to free us, not enslave us. So if you're not experiencing freedom, you're not experiencing God. Because God is a God of freedom, and He has called us to be free. We should be the freest people walking around, yet we're the most divided people walking around. Whew. Are y'all feeling me? Yeah. Are you feeling me? So what I would do when I caught eyes with that young girl, I knew she was the one. I ignored my inventory and I kept doing what I knew I didn't want to do. I stopped denying myself and I stopped obeying God. I walked away from grace and I started using AA as my religion. I used to hate religious people. I didn't go to church because I hated religion. I didn't want to hear about Jesus because I hated it. But I come to realize the reason why I didn't want to hear about Jesus was because that meant I had to change some things. And that scared me. Because when I got here, I wanted not to drink, but I didn't want to change. I wanted the benefits of what y'all were talking about, but I didn't want to sacrifice nothing to get it. And so as I started doing what I told myself I couldn't do, I began to walk in darkness, yet claimed to be in relationship with God. Now, I had a relationship with God just as anybody else who has asked Him into their heart, you got a relationship with God. But what I have found, though, I claimed to have fellowship with Him, yet I walked in darkness. When I began to ignore my 4-step and I began to do what I said I couldn't do, I started walking in darkness. After a while, I began to trade the darkness for the truth. And so when the relationship ended in shambles like they all will, let's just be honest. Anything built on dishonesty crumbles. It's going to fail. Nothing good comes out of darkness. It always comes to the light. Yet when God's grace still there despite me, y'all understand what I'm saying? Just when I didn't adhere perfectly to these principles, God still went with me. But yet when He would pick me up again when I would fall, I would then, instead of going what my inventory said, I would go back to the relationship. Only to think that I could conform the image of God to suit my relationship instead of stopping and surrendering and allowing Him to conform me to Him. Then I would get drunk and end up in AA saying I did everything I was supposed to and it ain't working. And the only thing I wasn't doing was obeying God through the steps. I had turned around and everything I did was to gain peace. I went to meetings to get peace. I wrote a 4-step to get peace. I helped others to get peace. And all I was doing was using you to gain more of me. When the truth is the peace He gave me the day He met me was what He intended me to do from. Yet I ignored Him and started using what He gave me to free me to slave me. And though I hated religion, the day my recovery started blossoming was the day I hit my knees crying, having to confess to God that I had made AA my religion. And I wanted to die. 7 years sober. I was working my program, not the program. And I wanted to die. Guys, I only share that because of like my father. I used to think he was correcting me and hurting me, but really he was steering me away from disaster because He loved me. And I know that you're 22, you're 23, you're 25, you're 30, and you're young. And I know these older folks like to hold over your head things that they've already done. And just because you got sober don't mean you ain't going to do it. Are you hearing me? Just because someone's 55 who's went through all the ringings and they're sober now doesn't mean because you're sober you ain't going to do it. The reason you're sober and God's grace saved you is because when you do it, He can teach you how not to do it again. That's right. Just because we get sober don't mean we don't bring years of hurt, wounds, and pains with us. That's right. And us as members waiting on people to get here is not to hurt anyone, but to guide them in the direction someone guided us in. Back to the light. This is the light. I don't know that I ever willfully wanted to write a 4-step when I was doing what I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing. It exposes you, don't it? Yeah. It exposes you. I got about 3 minutes left. You know, God is good, God is constant, God is consistent, and He loves you. He's not intimidated by what you've done, maybe what you're doing. He just wants you to know that when you get over yourself, He's waiting right there for you. He wants what's best for you. He has a future for you. He has given and instilled in you a purpose that only you can carry out. You are a light that can't be hidden. You are a city on a hilltop that can't be hidden. Every person here has a purpose. And God has already blessed you and given you the grace to carry it out. It's when you use His grace to carry out your will does His plan fail. Grace has a rightful purpose. And it's through conforming to His image so that we can save people in hell like somebody saved us in hell. That's the only reason that we have a process of recovery. Not so that we can gain anything, but so that we can lose a lot so that He can gain. Guys, when you grasp that God's grace brought you here not for yourself, but so that you could die to self, to live to God, you will go on to reach thousands and thousands of people for a good purpose. I'm talking about people in here today who feel like they have no purpose. I'm talking about people in here today that I couldn't convince them that there's any good coming out of what you just came out of. I'm talking God didn't go get President Barack Obama. He didn't go get the mainstream guys who's making millions of dollars. He went and got you. Yeah. I'm talking about the slum, scum of the earth left to other people to say. I'm talking about people who don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, yet He pursued you to do His work. He pursued you. That's why you're here today. You didn't come here to hear Bradley speak. You come here to be assured that the God of this universe is pursuing you. That the God of this universe says that you are effectively and wonderfully created for purpose, on purpose. And that there are people dying that only you can help. So my question here today is this. What are you doing about it? When are you going to die, ma'am? You don't know, do you? Does anybody in here know when they're going to die? No. You don't have a clue. You don't have nothing to do with it. I'm dead already. What about when you were born? You know when you were born, but did you have anything to do with that day? Shoot, my mom tells me the story. She said, I was going to get my tooth tied until they told me I had you in my stomach. So I know I didn't have nothing to do with that day. So when they lay you to rest and they put your tombstone on your grave, there'll be 2 dates on it, the day you were born and the day you died. And there'll be a dash in the middle. But for some reason, if we had nothing to do with the day we were born and the day we died, somewhere along the lines we thought we had something to do with the in-between. If you was to die today, people would remember you by that dash. But because God loves you and sacrificed Himself to give you life, you're here today with a decision to go another direction. Today is the day of salvation. Accept it, or go on to the miserable, bitter end of blotting out the consciousness of your intolerable situation as best you know how. Choose today whom you will serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Okay. Next deal is